I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. And I was breathing but not alive. And all my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all I know. The only knew Jesus when I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, but now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, and then you call my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You call my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day.
In the darkness we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the
Well, once again, hello, welcome to Rocky River Church. It's really good to see you guys today, and I'm glad to be in church. How about you? I thought the music was great. Can we give those guys a big hand? I love good music. If you have a Bible with you, open it up or turn it on and go to the book of Luke. That's in the New Testament. Only 3 books in, so you go to Matthew, Mark, and then Luke. Then find chapter 15. We're going to look at verses 11 through 24. So Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 24. Also, if you haven't already, find your message notes and take those out. All the scripture passages that we're going to look at today are printed there for you. And so I think they'll be a big help for you. Let me just mention this. You know, I'm kind of private, not with everything, but with some things, lots of things, and I'm just going to throw this out to you because it might become an issue here in a little bit. I hope not, but it might. So I'm in a coaching network. You ever had that happen? When you start getting old and brittle like me, I guess, that it starts to happen. Is that right, Rick? Is that what happens when you get old? Okay. So it's, maybe this is too much information, but it's a back tooth at the top. It's just in a terrible spot, and it's sensitive, and I'm on some really good medicine. So I apologize ahead of time for anything that I say that is not savory, but I don't think that'll happen. But it's been a long week. You know, you would think that you could find a dentist that could help you in an emergency situation, but apparently with the whole COVID thing, that's just not easy to do. But hopefully I'll get this thing fixed tomorrow, and it won't be something that just drags on and on and on, because I have a pretty high tolerance for pain, but I'm done with it. I'm ready for it to stop. But anyway, if I start talking funny a little bit later, maybe slur my words, if it looks like I've been in a hockey fight or something, I apologize ahead of time. So anyway, TMI. All right, well, anyway, we're in week number 2 of our teaching series called The Greatest Stories Ever Told, the Parables of Jesus. You know, one of the things that Jesus was best known for is his teachings. And one of the ways that Jesus taught the most was through parables, which are these short stories. Now, just to remind you, and you have a place in your notes for this, a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. I want you to say that with me. You think you can? A parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And these are stories that that Jesus told that maybe were made up. In other words, that they're stories that are taken maybe from real life situations, but names are not given maybe to protect the innocent. But it's usually some real life situation in order to teach us a spiritual truth or principle. And in these stories, Jesus just used everyday happenings in life, things like fishing. We have any fishermen in the room or fisher women? 3 of us, that's it? 4, okay, 4. You guys you're lying about fish. It's okay to, I'm not asking you to go fishing right now during church. It's okay. But Jesus also told stories about, farming and weddings and cooking and even how to deal with difficult neighbors. How many of you have difficult neighbors? I hope they're not sitting near you. But Jesus used these parables to explain important theological truths. It was just these stories to help us wrap our mind around really important things. But listen, Jesus didn't tell stories just to be known as a good storyteller. He wasn't just trying to become a popular teacher. The point of the parables is to show us a better way to live. I want to say that again because I want to make sure you get it. It's really what the parables are about completely. Jesus teaches these stories, these parables, because he wants us to learn how to live a better life. He wants us to live not for the things of this world, but to live in this world, but like we're citizens of another world or another kingdom. Jesus wanted to teach us how to live significant, meaningful lives. And yes, I'll throw this out there. I know this gets bad press when you say it in church, but I think Jesus wanted us to live happier lives. Not that means that everything will always be good in our lives, the external things. But sometimes happy is not just being able to laugh about something. So sometimes being happy is about knowing your purpose for living. And certainly Jesus wanted us to know that. He wanted us to learn how to live a better way in life that is, just quite frankly, it's hidden in plain view from most people in this world. Jesus told about 40 different parables. We're not going to look at all 40 of them in this series, but we're going to look at a few of them. And today we're going to look at one of the most well-known, maybe one of the most popular parables of all. It's the parable of the prodigal son. How many of you have heard this parable before? All right, here's what I want you to do. Keep your hands up. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to pretend like you don't know the story. There's a reason for that. Sometimes when we know a story of the Bible, we feel like we know it so well that we don't really have to pay attention to it. Like, oh yeah, I know. Kid wants his inheritance. His father gives it to him. He goes off, blows everything, comes back home. Father accepts him. End of story. Well, there's a whole lot more to it than that. So for the next few minutes, I want you to pretend like you don't know the story. And the reason for this is because I want you to lean into today's message. I said this the last couple of Sundays. I'm going to say it again today. I believe that God wants to use this series, these stories, these parables, not because of anything I have to say, but because this is Jesus speaking to us. And he's teaching us a better way to live. So I believe that he wants to change lives. I believe he wants to change the lives of some people sitting right here in this room today, maybe your life. So lean in. Right now, what I'm going to do is read the entire story while you just follow along, and then we're going to come back and unpack it. Are you ready for that? Everybody good? All right, here we go. So Luke chapter 15, picking up in verse 11, Jesus continued. Well, what's he continuing? Well, Jesus is really I know we live in the South and barbecue is king, and I can't imagine how it could ever be wrong to love pork, because it feels so right, doesn't it? But they were not allowed to, and it was literally against their religious law to feed swine. And so it just lets you know how dark things have become for this young man. Verse 16 says that he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. And think of it as like Purina, like dry dog food. He's longing to eat what the pigs were eating. And look, it says, but no one gave him anything. You know, all those good time friends are gone. Ever have any good time friends that when you stopped good timing with them, they're gone? Yeah. You should become a minister. Man, you lose a lot of them. And sometimes you don't really lose them. You don't get invited to the parties anymore. So. But no one's given him anything. You know, it's interesting that Satan never tells us about the bad stuff, does he? When he's a younger guy and he's hearing about this distant country and how the girls dress in Vegas, or how they don't dress. I guess it depends on how you look at, or all the fun there. Satan wants you to see the good, if there is such a thing, in sin, but he never shows you what a life looks like once it's been driven into the ground with sin. Sin always takes us further away than we meant to go. It always costs us more than we intend to spend. It always keeps us longer than we meant to stay. Verse 17, this is where things begin to change. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. What's wrong with me? This is stupid. This is crazy. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. To me, this is the best part of the story. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son began to, give the speech that he's rehearsed all the way home. This is his confession. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quickly, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. It's a great story, isn't it? And you can see why this has been called one of the greatest short stories ever written. Well, one of the things that you ought to know about this parable is that the younger son, the prodigal son, it represents us. Who? Us. You and me, that's right. Because no matter where you are right now in your spiritual life, at some point, we all run from God. Maybe you're running from him right now. Maybe you've been running from God for a while, maybe even your whole life. Maybe it isn't that you've even stopped reading your Bible, but you've just started doing those things out of habit. And so while your feet may sort of still be at home, your heart has been away from him for a while. What I want to do in this message is to show you how to come back home to God and how to experience his unconditional love. Sound good? There are 4 steps I see in this parable that lead us back home. Here's the first one. I admit that I have run away from God. The first step to come home to God and receive his unconditional love is just to admit that you've run away from him. Now, let me ask you this. When we talk about the prodigal son, again, how many of you have heard the story before? But do you know what the prodigal son means? Do you know what that whole word prodigal means? I asked Diego about it this morning. I said, Diego, do you know what prodigal means? He said, yeah, isn't that like usually a younger person that has really exceptional gifts and abilities? I said, no, that's a prodigy. I'm just kidding. He didn't say that. But I was thinking about it this morning. I thought, man, that's funny. Maybe I could just hammer on Diego about it a little bit. But a prodigal is someone different. A prodigal is someone who runs away from responsibility and takes what he or she has and they go out and they just throw it away. They burn right through it in some sinful lifestyle. But let me sum it up this way. A prodigal is someone who leaves a better way of life for a lesser way of life. The prodigal son went out to live his own way, his own life, by his own rules. Finally, I've got my independence. No more dad telling me what to do. No more big brother looking over my shoulder. I mean that in the real sense, not like in a government sense. He has an older brother. You know, I kind of think of it as like living with John Boy Walton. Any of you old enough to remember the Waltons? Wouldn't that be a tough gig to grow up with John Boy as your older brother? So no more of that. No more John Boy, no more dad, no more God. You know, see, he mentions that he's walked away from his faith. No one is telling him what to do. He's living by his own rules, and then one day he wakes up to discover that his way of living was the lesser way of living. And look, what he did is pretty normal. I would say typical. He did what lots of young, immature, rebellious people do. We want to go out and do our own thing because we think that somehow there is freedom in doing it our way, only to discover at some point that you've become a slave to your way, to your appetite for sin. Think back to the job that this kid had. I call him a kid. We don't know how old he is, but I mean, in their culture, he's probably late into his teens, which would, in our world today, be somewhere in his 30s. But I'm not going to get into that. But his job was feeding the pigs. Jesus says in verse 16, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. This right here, this is where reality has set into his life, don't you know? I mean, this is where he must realize, I have taken the wrong path. And the pigsty here is a reminder that sometimes we settle for what the world has to offer us. Sin doesn't always look like a pigsty on the outside, but it leads to one. The pigsty also reminds us that sometimes God will allow us to hit a staggeringly low point in life so that we can realize that we've run away from God and yet we still need him. Sometimes you have to eat with the pigs before you realize you need to go home. And some of you are there now. maybe not literally. Maybe you're not literally in a with the pigs when God had something better for us. And I would imagine that there's someone here thinking right now, but Jimmy, that's not really me. That's not where I'm at in life. And I've been living away from God for most of my life, maybe all of my life. And I don't feel like I'm falling apart. I don't feel like I'm living in a pigsty. Well, that may be. But I'll bet you do know the spiritual hunger that comes from being disconnected with your Heavenly Father. I'll bet you do know the loneliness and the emptiness that comes with knowing that there must be more to life than what you're living, more than life than what you're experiencing right now. Because if you're doing life without God, you certainly know the fear that creeps into your life when you're alone and you think, is there more to life than this? And I'm sure that some of you have come to church today because you're looking for a better way forward, a better path in life, a better way to live. Well, step one is just admitting that you've run away from God. Here's step number two. Decide to return home. Decide to return home to God. Look again at verses 17 through 20. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went home. He went back home to his father. You know, in the beginning of the story, when the son wanted to leave, the dad knew he was making a mistake, didn't he? But apparently this kid, he's old enough that dad can't force him to stay at home. But I'm sure dad knew that's not the right thing to do anyway. And then even after the son had blown it in life, went to Vegas and let everything ride, and now he's broken and broke, his dad still didn't go to him and say, "Now you have to come home." And the reason is he knew that it had to be his son's decision. He knew that it had to be the son making up his own mind to return home. And listen, in the same way, you and I have the freedom to walk away from God. But you also have the freedom to return home. Coming home to God is a choice that only you can make. Only you can make it for yourself. This makes me think a little bit of my mom. So I didn't like school growing up. I have ADHD. Now, I didn't know that then. I just thought back then there was something wrong with me. And so I did what I'm sure most people did, you know, when they were my age. They just figured out a way to deal with it and move on. Well, I did too, but it hurt me in school. Now, in college, and I would have never gone to college had God not called me into ministry. But I loved college. And I did pretty well in college and had close to a perfect GPA in graduate school. And so if I'm going to tell you I was a bad student in school growing up, can I tell you that I did really well in graduate school? Okay, just for my mama's sake. I can remember in the 8th grade bringing home a report card. I think there were 6 classes I was taking, and I failed everything except PE. Now, my dad did not appreciate that at all, because he was paying for me to go to school. My mom didn't like it, but she just had a different way of dealing with it than my dad. And I can hear her say something like, I can't do your schoolwork for you. I can't go to school and take your tests. If I could, I would, but I can't. You are going to have to do this on your own. Coming home to God is like that. I can't do it for you. My grandpa's a Southern Baptist preacher. He couldn't do it for me. I can't do it for you. You have to make the decision on your own to come home. So when the son came to his senses, when he remembered that home was better than a pigsty, he said, I'm going to go home. And it wasn't just a decision. It was a decision he acted on. He got up and went to his father. He realized that it just didn't make sense anymore to live in the pigsty, that maybe he thought it was bad living at home because he's having to live under somebody else's rules. But listen, let me just tell all the rebels here without a cause. You're always living by somebody else's rules. Man, in school, I don't know. Should I say? Yeah, I went to a private school where we had a dress code, we had a hair code. I hated that for 2 reasons. Number one, I wanted Leonard Skinner hair. And I've got it, but it just didn't meet the hair code. And the second reason I hate it is because I couldn't wear any of my best shirts. Like my Black Sabbath shirt, I sold my soul for rock and roll, or so when I graduated from high school, I thought, man, this is awesome. My hair is going to grow out. And it grew down past my collar. And I walked into work one day. My dad was my boss. He said, don't come back till you have a haircut. What? I thought I'd been liberated from that. And I found out that there are rules in the world. You're always living under somebody else's authority. Home was better than the pigsty. And he realized that home was where he belonged. So he humbled himself and he returned home. I want you to listen to this. Don't forget this. Your story, your life story, is a spiritual journey. Your life story is a spiritual journey. And in your life story, your home is meant to be with God. It's always with God. You were created to have a relationship with Him. It's our decision to sin against Him. That's what leads us away from God. Sin is when God says, I want your life to go in this direction, but you say, no, I don't think I'm going to go in that direction. I'm going to go in this direction. And it leads you away from God, because sin always leads us away from God. It always leads us away from where we're supposed to be, and it destroys our relationship with God. The solution is to decide, this is crazy. This rebellion against God, it just doesn't make sense. It's ruining my life. I'm going home. And I want you to know that returning home is not, I was going to say it's not that difficult, but the reality is it's not difficult. It just means owning your mistakes, admitting that you've run away from God, and then you go home. But I'm sure that some of you are thinking right now, something like I've thought in my own life at different times, I'll go home to God, I'll come back to God, I think that's what I really should do, but first I have to get my life together. No, you don't. I'll just tell you from experience, you can't put your life together without God because you can't put it together. And the fact that you've been trying to put it together is the reason it's broken. You just go home, and then God will take you just as you are. Let me tell you something I hope you never forget. You are never too far gone from God. You are never so far away from God that He can't get to you. You can never do something where God will just write you off and say, that's it. And it's never too late to come home to God. He loves you far more than you'll ever understand. Next, embrace God's unconditional love. Just embrace it, receive it. Look again at verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And I just love this picture of this father running out to meet his son. It's hard to tell in the English translation, but if you look at this in the original language, which was Greek, Jesus uses words to describe this father running out to meet his son as he completely abandons his dignity. So I'm gonna explain this, and some of you are gonna laugh about it. Wear this cloak. It's just the way men in the Middle East, it's the way they dressed. Then a lot of them still dress this way. He just ran to meet his son. He'd been watching for him too.